Hey guys, welcome back to our read aloud. We're still reading Andrew Clement's Frindle. What I like to do before I start a new chapter is I like to kind of summarize and play the events back of what I previously read. That way I've readied my mind for new information, new events. So last time we were reading in chapter 1, we met Nick Allen. We learned that Nick Allen has a lot of creative ideas that sometimes can get him into some trouble. For example, he had the idea of turning his classroom into kind of like a tropical beach, and everyone's hula dancing and playing volleyball. Now, that caused some problems because it also led to a lot of sand being in the hallway that the custodian would then have to pick up. And he didn't seem too happy about that. And then we met his teacher after that, Miss Avery, and she didn't like it that Nick got the idea to peep like a blackbird just periodically, occasionally throughout the school year. Something she had to deal with constantly. But now we're on a new chapter. This is chapter 2. This chapter is titled Mrs. Granger. So already I'm readying my mind. I met two teachers in the past, and now this chapter is titled Mrs. Granger. I'm wondering if that's another teacher, or are we going to be introduced to a different type of character, maybe the principal? I don't know yet. But I want to see how Andrew Clements takes us from that backstory of Nick Allen so we understand the type of person he is into our main story. I think chapter 1 is just to kind of understand who Nick really is. And now the author, wants to kind of transition us into the main story. So let's find out. Chapter 2, Mrs. Granger. 5th grade was different. Whoa. I'm already transitioned. New grade level, and it seems like it's going to be completely different. Not only does he say it's different, but look at how he says it. I'm going to hold that up. All caps. 5th grade was different. Now, I know that's backwards for you guys, but you can see the all caps. Already, I'm ready in my mind for whatever's coming next. How is this going to be different? That was the year to get ready for middle school. 5th grade meant passing classes. It meant no morning recess. It meant real letter grades on your report cards. But most of all, it meant Mrs. Granger. Nick is listing, or the author is listing a bunch of bad things. No morning recess, letter grades on your report cards. But then it says Mrs. Granger. I wonder if Mrs. Granger is also a bad thing, like if this is part of that list. There were about 150 kids in 5th grade, and there were 7 5th grade teachers. 2 math, 2 science, 2 social studies, but only 1 language arts teacher. In language arts, Mrs. Granger had a monopoly and a reputation. A monopoly, like the game? When I think of the word monopoly, I think of a board game. I mean, maybe you've played that game as well, but I don't think they're talking about a board game here. She had a monopoly. Let me think about the other information. There's 2 math teachers, 2 science, 2 social studies, but only 1 language arts teacher. Miss Granger had a monopoly. Maybe monopoly means like the only one doing something. Like you controlled that one area. Like she controlled all of language arts. Mrs. Granger lived alone in a tiny little house in the older part of town. She drove an old pale blue car to school every morning, rain or shine, snow or sleet, hail or wind. She had a perfect attendance record that stretched back farther than anybody could remember. Her hair was almost white, swept away from her face and up into something like a nest on the back of her head. Unlike some of the younger women teachers, she never wore pants to school. She had two skirt and jacket outfits, her gray uniform and her blue uniform, which she always wore over a white shirt with a little camo pin at the neck. And Mrs. Granger was one of those people who never sweats. It had to be over 90 degrees before she even took off her jacket. She was small, as teachers go. There were even some 5th graders who were taller than her, but Mrs. Granger seemed like a giant. It was her eyes that did it. They were dark gray, And if she turned them on full power, they could make you feel like a speck of dust. Wow. I like the way he's writing about her. We're getting a lot of information about Mrs. Granger, but the way he's writing really shows us how much power she gives off. She's a small, older lady, but even still, she has that energy, that attitude that makes kids kind of scared and straightened up and kind of on edge a little bit. Maybe you can think about some teachers at Creighton that maybe make you feel that way, or times that you've been around adults where just being around them, the way they carry themselves kind of makes you feel like, oh, I better not misbehave here. This person's going to crack down on me. So that seems to be the type of person she is. It was her eyes that did it. They were dark gray, and if she turned them on full power, they could make you feel like a speck of dust. Her eyes could twinkle and laugh too, and kids said she could crack really funny jokes. But it wasn't the jokes that made her famous. Everyone was sure that Mrs. Granger had X-ray vision. Don't even think about chewing a piece of gum within 50 feet of her. If you did, Mrs. Granger would see you, catch you, and make you stick the gum out onto a bright yellow index card. Then she would safety pin the card to the front of your shirt, and you'd have to wear it for the rest of the school day. After that, you had to take it home and have your mom or dad sign the card and bring it back to Mrs. Granger the next day. And it didn't matter to Mrs. Granger if you were in 5th grade, because the way she saw it, sooner or later, you were going to be. Okay, let's take into a moment to think about what we just learned. If you get caught chewing a piece of gum, you have to take it out, put it on an index card, and wear that index card on your shirt. It's kind of gross. All day long, every kid is seeing you wearing chewed gum on your shirt. Then you have to take that gum and that index card, take it home and get it signed by your parents, bring it back the next day. That's a strict teacher. I think Andrew Clements is showing us an example of just how strict Mrs. Granger can be. Might be important to know that for future events. All the kids at Lincoln Elementary School knew that at the end of the line, 5th grade, Mrs. Granger would be the one grading their spelling tests and their reading tests, and worst of all, their vocabulary tests, week after week, month after month. Every language arts teacher in the world enjoys making kids use the dictionary. Check your spelling, check that definition, check those syllable breaks. But Mrs. Granger didn't just enjoy the dictionary. She loved the dictionary, almost worshipped it. Her weekly vocabulary lists were 35 words long, sometimes longer. As if that wasn't bad enough, there was a word of the day on the blackboard every morning. If you gave yourself a day off and didn't write down and look up and learn that definition, sooner or later, Mrs. Granger would find out, and then just for you, there would be 2 words of the day for the whole week. Now I'm going to take a moment, because there's not many illustrations, but there are a few. This one is an illustration, and there's actually a caption at the bottom that says, Mrs. Granger loved the dictionary. So there's Mrs. Granger. At the top it says, we the dictionary. I think that's a play off We the People, maybe. And then we have Mrs. Granger, and then in front of her, displayed proudly, is her dictionary. So that should help you put like a mental picture of her in your head. Mrs. Granger kept a full set of 30 dictionaries on a shelf at the back of the room. But her pride and joy was one of those huge dictionaries with every word in the universe in it, the kind of book it takes 2 kids to carry. It sat on its own little table at the front of the classroom, sort of like an altar at the front of a church. Every graduate of Lincoln Elementary School for the past 35 years could remember standing at that table, listening to Mrs. Granger's battle cry. Look it up. That's why we have a dictionary. I feel like I've said that too. Maybe if you're one of my students, you could maybe agree with that. Even before the school year started, when it was still the summer before 5th grade, for Nick and his friends, Mrs. Granger was already busy. Every parent of every new 5th grader got a letter from her. Nick's mom read part of it out loud during dinner one night in August. Every home is expected to have a good dictionary, so that each student can do his or her homework properly. Good spelling and good grammar and good word skills are essential for every student. Clear thinking requires a command of the English language. In 5th grade is the ideal time for every girl and boy to acquire an expanded vocabulary. And then there was the list of dictionaries that Mrs. Granger thought would be acceptable for home study. Mrs. Allen, so that must be Nick's mom, Mrs. Allen said, "It's so nice to have a teacher who takes her work so seriously." Nick groaned and tried to enjoy the rest of his hamburger. But even watermelon for dessert didn't cheer him up much. Nick had no particular use for the dictionary. He liked words a lot, and he was good at using them, but he figured that he got all the words he needed just by reading. And Nick read all the time. That's kind of cool. I don't know about you, but when I was picturing Nick in my head from chapter 1, all the pranks he's pulling and the trouble he's causing, I didn't think of him as a kid that liked to read a lot and reading all the time. Now I'm taking the information of what I knew about Nick and I'm adding new information. Nick's a reader, and he's getting a lot of information based off what he reads. That's how he learns a lot of new words. So I'm building an even bigger idea of Nick Allen, the character. And I'm going to keep doing that as we keep getting more and more information about Nick. When Nick ran into a word he didn't know, he asked his brother or his dad or whoever was handy what it meant. And if they knew, they would tell him. But not Mrs. Granger. He had heard all about her. He had seen 5th graders in the library last year, noses stuck in their dictionaries, frantically trying to finish their vocabulary sheets before English class. It was still a week before school, and Nick already felt like 5th grade was going to be a very long year. Okay, that's the end of chapter 2. Chapter 2 had a lot going on. We learned a lot about Mrs. Granger. We learned a lot about the expectations of 5th grade, and 5th grade hasn't even started yet in this book. So I'm wondering if this has just been a bunch of setup for whatever problems are going to come up in 5th grade for Nick Allen. And those problems probably are going to involve Mrs. Granger. And again, we have a title of a really odd word. Frindle. We know words are important to Mrs. Granger. I'm just trying to piece together and make some predictions about what might be a big problem in this book. Hopefully you're doing the same at home, and we'll read chapter 3 together very soon. All right, thank you guys.